This is part 3 of the series of videos about Ulysses Grant's life. To see parts 1 and 2, click the links in the description below. They go into Grant's life up to his first term as President of the United States. This video is about his second term, as well as the scandals in his presidency and the rest of his life. We'll start at the 1872 presidential election. Grant faced Horace Greeley, who was a founding member of the Republican Party. Greeley split with the Republicans over the issue of corruption in Grant's administration, which hadn't been public knowledge yet, and he was against the Enforcement Acts, which allowed the federal government to pretty much wipe out the KKK. Greeley wasn't a member of the Democrat Party. He created a new party called the Liberal Republican Party, but he was still endorsed by the Democrats. Greeley died before the Electoral College could convene to certify the votes, but Grant still won in a landslide. Now, let's go into the positive aspects about his second term before going into the scandals. Throughout his second term, there were numerous riots and revolts in the South, mainly due to the fact that black people were getting integrated into most places and activities. Grant ordered troops to quell all of these rebellions, and they did. He also signed the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Although it was later repealed by the Supreme Court as being unconstitutional, portions of it were used in the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 1968. In 1873, there was an economic downturn that started in Europe, but it spread to America that same year. Poor economic conditions led many voters to turn away from the Republican Party, and in the 1874 midterm elections, Democrats regained the House of Representatives for the first time in over a decade following the outbreak of the Civil War. Now come the scandals. One thing about Grant is that he wasn't a great judge of character. He'd appoint people who he thought were honest but really weren't. This led to multiple scandals in his administration where the men he appointed turned out to be corrupt and untrustworthy. Perhaps the biggest scandal was the Crédit Immobilier scandal. This was concerning the Transcontinental Railroad. Union Pacific, the company who built most of the Transcontinental Railroad, the first railroad that connected the East Coast and the West Coast, built their portion of it for $50 million. Congress, who authorized the building of the railroad, had to pay Union Pacific for building it. Union Pacific lied about how much the railroad cost to build, and they asked Congress for $94 million, with the executives at Union Pacific taking the extra $44 million for themselves and bribing politicians with it. It was called the Crédit Immobilier scandal because that was the name of the front that the Union Pacific executives created to make it look like the railroad was being built by an impartial outsider. It wasn't. This scandal was broken to the public during Grant's re-election campaign and severely impacted the credibility of several of Grant's inner circle. Grant himself didn't lose very many votes since he himself wasn't implicated. The other main scandal in Grant's second term was the whiskey ring. This was basically whiskey distillers bribing officials in the US Treasury to evade taxes. Grant's newly created Department of Justice prosecuted all those involved, and there were quite a few members of the Republican Party in Grant's inner circle indicted. Even his own private secretary was, until Grant testified to his innocence. Historians don't know to what extent Grant was aware of this, but these scandals, as well as the amount of corruption and bribery in his cabinet, eroded public opinion of him. He declined to run again for a third term in 1876, back then it was still allowed, but still won praise for his handling of the 1876 presidential election, in which both candidates claimed victory. I'm not going to go in depth on that since that's a video in and of itself, but the dispute over whether the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate won was peacefully resolved, despite Grant increasing the number of federal troops in and around Washington. Rutherford Hayes, the Republican nominee, became the new president, but as part of the compromise, federal troops were withdrawn from the South, marking the end of the Reconstruction era. Soon, Jim Crow laws were enacted and black people in the South were segregated from white people. Grant left office in March 1877, and 2 months later, in May, he embarked on a trip around the world. For 2 years, he toured Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, returning in 1879. His name was put forward at the 1880 Republican National Convention to run for president again, and he almost gained the party's nomination. After 35 ballots, though, a tight race between himself and former Speaker of the House James Blaine led to a compromise candidate, James Garfield, being nominated. In 1883, he invested in another business scheme and again was scammed out of his money. In 1884, he found out he was suffering from throat cancer, and he didn't want to die without leaving his family anything. He started writing his memoirs to provide for his family after his death, and writing through excruciating pain, he finished his memoirs just days before he died at the age of 63 on July 23, 1885. His memoirs covered his life up to his presidency. Back then, his presidency was viewed quite negatively, and it's only in recent decades that his presidency has been viewed in a more favorable light. His memoirs were a huge success. It left his widow, Julia Grant, $450,000, or today, almost $14 million. So, that's the life of Ulysses Grant. If you liked the video, then be sure to subscribe and like. Thank you for watching Explained. New videos every other Friday.